The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We are back to another edition of Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution Radio. I'm your host, Diamond, from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, and this is my lovely co-host, Leah Shaper, and partner. You're muted.
Again, hello.
All right, glad to have you on the show. You almost didn't make it once again.
What else is new? I think I need
So last week, Ransom talked about the Cambrian explosion, and he talked about octopuses and things like that. Mm-hmm. And we're going to extrapolate a little further on that. We're going to be discussing life in general and what happened. What happened that we were on this earth, and then like 4 billion years ago, there was single-celled organisms, and that for billions of years, that's all that existed until all of a sudden things changed for a short period of time, and then they changed even more dramatically during the Cambrian explosion. And we'll get to all of that. And then in the second half of the show, we'll discuss maybe some of the mechanisms that created this life. Are you ready for it?
Yeah, and I hope that's a most definitely, because the mechanism conversation is quite interesting.
Now it's like full circle. The show is Cosmic Catastrophe. We've been talking about impactors for months, causing things like the Younger Dryas event, which is an extinction event and a speciation event when maybe thousands of objects hit the ice sheet, creating the Carolina Bays and killing all the natives in North America for the most part. And then we also have like Burkle Crater 6,000 years ago hitting the ocean, the Indian Ocean, and creating a tsunami, which everyone calls the flood. So what we're seeing is that these objects hit Earth a lot. Now, what if there are even bigger swarms, like the ones that wiped out the dinosaurs? We know that was a major mass extinction. So just keep that in mind as we move forward.
Well, also, what if collisions of objects with Earth help actually create life on Earth?
Maybe.
Maybe they do both.
Yeah, so let's start sharing, and let me know if you can see the screen.
I can see it.
Okay, so this is an amazing article from the Lost Index in a geology resource, The Strange Race to Track Down a Missing Billion Years. And this is where we'll start, because the first half is going to be a geology lesson on basic geology and the great unconformity and what's going on during that time. So there is something called the great unconformity. Most people learn about it if they take a basic geology course in their undergraduate years. They use this picture of the Grand Canyon here to show that there are these basement rocks, which are very old Precambrian rocks, that are tilted and folded and faulted up at strange angles. And then sitting on top are these perfectly flat-lying sediments that begin at the Cambrian explosion around 550 million years ago or so. We're going to get to the dates in a moment that are more specific, but just keep in mind these dates have been shifting. I mean, since I haven't taught this kind of stuff in 30 years, so you can imagine the dates I was using back then.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, also our dating for a time period like this is just not very good, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it isn't. And I'm going to show you some examples of this great unconformity because living in the Southwest, we have all of the outcrops out here. They're in Colorado, they're in Arizona. Here we can see the Precambrian Pikes Peak granite overlain by perfectly flat-lying Saltwatch sandstones. And I think that might be up in Wyoming. Here is in the Grand Canyon. This guy's got his right arm on the Vishnu schist, which again is Precambrian metamorphic rock that used to be deep in the earth, and it's being overlain by this perfect sandstone unit. And that's the Tapeats sandstone right here in this picture. So you can see the red line is the great unconformity, which is right between his hands right here. So this line right here is the red line. Mm-hmm. And what's happening there is there's almost 1 billion years of information missing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is fascinating. This is the outcrop in Colorado. It's one of the most striking, where the beds are perpendicular to each other.
Yeah.
Now, this is how geology started. That makes sense, right? There's an intellectual person looking at this and staring at it, and they're like, what in God's earth happened to create this?
Yeah. And it looks different than every other layer that's available.
Yeah, something extreme had to happen on this great unconformity. And in fact, it was first discussed by James Hutton in 1787. He was a Scottish geologist and agriculturalist, one of the first geologists right there, James Hutton, and the father of geology. I believe that's a term that is used. So that's how long we've known about this great unconformity, and they've been arguing about it ever since.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, so that's the background. There is about a billion years missing on that unconformity, and clearly what has happened during that time is massive amounts of erosion, right? You can understand that. And also there's been some tilting of beds, and because these are vertical.
Yeah.
And
well,
if
do you think it has to be erosion?
Well, there has to be erosion to cut this kind of
in order for the material to be missing.
Yeah, this layer here that's formed, that's a massive erosional layer. There's literally 14 miles of material missing.
I mean, because one of the things that I often think about when I look at this is the expanding Earth hypothesis. Right? Like, couldn't we postulate that layer was essentially being stretched out in a way?
No, because these basins form only on continental plates. These are continental deposits that are on the North American plate. These plates have been above sea level for all of time.
Yeah.
They're the only plates that are forming sedimentary basins. The other basins in the ocean are oceanic basins, and they're much different than this. So the only way you can get sediments deposited in a basin, like the flat-lying sandstones starting at the Cambrian and up here, is if the basin is dropping down and water's running into it. Not ocean water, fresh water for the most part. And the only way you get an erosional plane like the red line is when there's uplift and things are being sheared off due to wind, weather, and ice. So this is a continental plate, so that's the only thing we can work with. So if we were to see an unconformity like this with a missing billion years, well, a billion years is a long time for geology to happen. And it simply could be that there was just a billion years of erosion. That would be enough time to erode 14 miles of sediment.
Right.
So that's the assumption we're working under. And that brings us to the geologic timescales that we're talking about here. When you look for a geologic timescale chart, they look like this. Most of them start at 570. And that's because that's when most life starts on Earth. And before that, it was just single-celled organisms. So they lump, look at this, 4.6 billion years into here, and then 570 million here.
Well, that's because we don't know anything about the Precambrian. So we've got to make it really small so we don't look stupid.
Yeah, there's not a lot of Precambrian rocks. The most of the Precambrian rocks are more recent Precambrian, which is the time period we're going to talk about. The three periods we're going to discuss bringing us to the Cambrian explosion is the Cryogenian, the Ediacaran, and what is the third one?
I thought Ediacaran was directly preceding Cambrian. So
Yes.
I don't know what the third one is.
There isn't one. But there are some glaciations that we need to talk about that are pretty important. So we're going to talk about the lead up to this line here, 570 they have it at. But in fact, there's other dates for the beginning of the Cambrian I'm sure that you uncovered. I think you threw out a 5.
I didn't look at dates real closely.
I think you gave me a 558.3 last night.
I gave you something specific, but I don't remember where I saw that exactly. I've seen 540, 538.
There it is. It's 538.8 here.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be talking about this era is called the Neo-Proterozoic. And so let's break the etymology down. Neo-Proterozoic. What does that mean to you?
Well, neo is new. I'm not really sure about the Proterozoic part because the first thing I think of is protozoa.
Yeah, protozoa. So this is new protozoa show up during the Neoproterozoic era.
Truthfully, I'm not sure that's the same root, but it could be.
I would imagine, because that's what happens during this time. This is the time when the Ediacaran fauna emerge out of nothing.
Yeah.
And so let's just talk. Let me see. Do I have any of this up here? Let's talk about what's going on with life. Prior to the Neoproterozoic, what we have on Earth. So prior to 1 billion years ago, some of them are pushing it back now, 4.6 billion or something. But around 4 billion years ago, life began on Earth in the form of single-celled organisms. Typically, we refer to it as like blue-green algae. But these single-celled organisms lasted on Earth for billions of years and did absolutely nothing. They didn't change. They didn't evolve. The only change we can see for billions of years is shifts in the morphology of these algae. So the single-cell creatures remain the same, but they start to form mats. And then those mats become mounds, which we call stromatolites. And then the mounds start to build into lumps, which we call thrombolites. But it's all the same single-celled organism, just grouping themselves in different ways. Have you heard of any of those things?
No.
Here, we can look. Here is a picture of the stromatolites still exist on Earth. And here we can see stromatolites at Shark Bay here. This picture, you see that?
Yeah.
So that's what we would probably call a thrombolite, because thrombolites are these weird pillars. And overall, the entire grouping of this single-celled organisms, however they colonialize, they're called microbolites. So Earth is existing for billions of years with the same stuff, blue-green algae. That's it. There's nothing else, nothing eating the algae. It's just algae. It's very bizarre until we get to this Cryogenian period. Now, the Cryogenian period is from 720 million to 635 million. And at 635 is the beginning of the Ediacaran. But what makes the Cryogenian period important is in the title. Cryo.
The frozen portion.
Yeah, it's frozen. Earth is frozen for a very long period of time. There are several ice ages that occur during the Cryogenian. The most substantial is the Marinoan glaciation, also known as the Varanger glaciation. It's a period of worldwide glaciation. Unlike the glacial period we're in now, where we get some glaciers up in the north, this was a big one. And glaciers moved almost to the equator on both sides of the Earth. And it lasted for, I guess here we can say 32, 42, 20 million years. And then, so that's the Cryogenian period. And that's the period that's missing in the Great Unconformity, right?
Right.
And so it's assumed that this unconformity was formed by massive scouring of glaciers for 20 million years. Think about this. The current glacial cycle we're in, the longest we have glaciers is like 20 to 80,000 years, and they go up and down. 20 to 80,000, and then they melt. This is a 20 million year period of continuous glaciation.
And do you think that the erosion may be in part the melting of those glaciers, the ending of this period?
No, the erosion, most erosion from glaciers forming is from them growing. So the thicker they get, the glacial front moves forward, and then the glacier flows. It literally scours the Earth like sandpaper.
Yeah.
And if you have 1 million tons of ice on top of it, the scouring is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
It's so amazing that all the deposits at the end moraine of the last glaciation, like up in Michigan and stuff, they're hundreds of feet, thousands of feet of pebbles there. That was the sandpaper that you have to go underneath to find the bedrock that it grounds flat.
Yeah.
If you go up into the Canadian Shield, at the center of where the ice sheet was 18,000 years ago, it's completely flat like a sheet of paper.
Yeah.
It's ground all the way down to the Precambrian.
Wow.
Just like the Great Unconformity.
Yeah. By the way, protero, as in Proterozoic, actually means former or earlier. So it's early life. It's former life.
The
quote
new
unquote beginning.
earlier. So that's what it means. The new earlier.
Yes, somehow. I mean, it doesn't quite make sense. I knew the etymology was off just because of the spelling, but.
All right, let's so the Cryogenian period is 20 million years of glaciation grinding the earth, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then it ends abruptly here at 635. And what happens after that is there's no glaciation for until 580. That's a very long time of non-glaciated. So it's like 10, almost 100 million years, a little under. And then we come to another glacial period, which is the Gaskir's glaciation. This is a short one. It only lasts under 340,000 years. But right after this glaciation is when the Ediacaran biota form out of nowhere. So for billions of years, we've got algae. And then after we've got 20 million years of glaciation, a warm up here, and then another glaciation, and boom, we've got new life on Earth.
Yep.
And no one knows, like even when I was in school, people argue all the time about what these creatures are you see in the middle of the page there. Let's blow this up. The one in the middle looks like a UFO.
Yeah.
This one looks like some kind of a Chinese pinwheel star. And this is a fingerprint.
Yeah.
The fingerprint is the most argued fossil in all of history. And I'm a paleontologist, so I studied a lot about Dickinsonia. And we even went and looked for it in the field. And it's so rare. Take a guess how big this thumbprint could be. We're talking from single-celled organisms to these things. How big do you think the thumbprint is? Like an inch or something?
I don't know, maybe palm-sized?
Well, here is 3 centimeters right there.
Oh, I didn't see that.
So that's a 10-centimeter one.
Yeah.
But in Europe, they've found them 1.4 meters in length.
Wow.
So at a boundary in Earth's geologic history, we went from single-celled algae to a 1.4 meter weird thumbprinty looking thing. And here's the fascinating story of Dickinsonia. For 7 years, paleontologists argued and made stories up about what this was. It's a sponge. It's a lichen. It's a this. It's a that. Last year, they did molecular analysis on the Dickinsonia, and they found cholesterol molecules.
Wow.
This is a complex organism that is our ancestor, you and I. This is the first organism creating cholesterol just like humans do. And it emerges from single-celled algae.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, not at a glance, none of it makes sense. Even the existence of the single-cell organisms, right? Because because the traditional narrative is that the single-celled organisms just out of the primordial soup just emerged out of nowhere. I mean, this is like saying that if you take 100 monkeys and you put them in a room and have them type randomly, that eventually they're going to write a story. I mean, that's how unlikely that is.
I mean, they will write a story.
It's not going to be intelligible and it's not going to have words unless you let them run with this for like, God only knows, 600 billion years or something like that. The concept is abiogenesis, life from nothing. I mean, I don't know about you, but that idea has always bothered me. It doesn't make any sense. And frankly, it was refuted by Pasteur a long time ago. But yet we still talk about this primordial soup as if these things just come out of nowhere.
They even have it here. I didn't even know it was linked in here. Look, the discovery of the cholesterol molecules in Dickinsonia lends support that Dickinsonia was an animal. So we all of a sudden just have animals on Earth.
Right.
And I don't think a spaceship came and dropped off the giant 1 meter Dickinsonia.
No.
Probably not. So the Ediacaran is this period before the Cambrian explosion, the end of the Precambrian, after we form the Great Unconformity. So the Great Unconformity grinds up the Earth for 20 million years. That's what it's going to do, is create a nutrient-rich ocean, the likes of which haven't been seen before, especially when the glaciers melt. They're going to be washing all these nutrients that are ground up into the ocean. And we're really setting the stage for your, what did you call it?
I don't know what you're
Primordial soup.
Oh, the primordial soup.
Because the primordial soup, I think, is important, and we'll get to that at the end. And then, okay, so we've got, let's go back to the fossils. There's not much going on in the Ediacaran. This is the main fossil assemblage.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't know if they're different. They're an extinct phyla. So this phyla of whatever these were don't even exist anymore. They pop up here in the Ediacaran, and then at the Precambrian at the Cambrian explosion, they disappear. So we really don't know what these things were. And then let's go here. Then we have at 540 here. That's a different age. The other one we just saw was 538.8.
Mm-hmm.
So there around 540, we've got the Cambrian explosion. Now you really never looked into this. When you looked into it, what were you thinking about when all of a sudden in these oceans, they're filled with trilobites and Wixwaxia and all kinds of crazy things. You've got things that look like corals and tube worms and sponges and shrimps, oh my, and sand fleas. And there are predators.
Mm-hmm.
How in the world do you go from algae to Dickinsonia to this?
Right.
And literally there is a layer that on the other side of it is this ocean.
Right. I mean, you really only have two choices here, right? You either believe in miracles that somehow these creatures just appear, or you have to think that there's latent genetic material around somewhere that's available to make this happen. And then, of course, the conditions have to be right as well.
Yeah, and the biodiversity, what we're looking at is the Burgess Shale biota. So this is just one section of an ocean that's up in British Columbia that has great preservation in this shale unit, where it's the first soft-shelled creatures that are preserved in the Cambrian, as well as hard-shelled creatures. Very bizarre biota here and very biodiverse. It's not like there are 3 new things. It's like every ecological niche was instantaneously filled. And 28 is, what are your thoughts on Anomalocaris?
Is this is the creature we were talking about yesterday with the giant mandibles that just went around eating everything?
They could be like mandible-like or like octopus-like with look at this. They have pinchers all the way down for grabbing, and then you just move the tentacles into your mouth.
Do you know what the size of this creature was?
They reached 12, 14 feet.
It's like, I don't want to be swimming in the ocean with one of those.
It's reminiscent of Dickinsonia, the phylogeny. The way that paleontologists have worked for all of history is based on form. That's it. We look at the form and the changes in form until this new technique where you can go to a fossil and break it down and do mass spectroscopy on it and find a cholesterol molecule.
Right.
That's absolutely mind-blowing.
Especially, or, if you happen to be
million.
lucky enough to get some genetic material, and then you can really examine the phylogeny.
Yeah, the oldest genetic material we've discussed is 2 million years old. They have found fragments of genetic material in amber in creatures in there, but it's so fragmentary that there's no way you're going to look at the gene. Like the 2 million year old frozen DNA is almost full DNA, which is why we can tell exactly what creatures they were.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. And why we probably won't bring back the dinosaur.
Maybe.
Now, yeah, woolly mammoth, that's already happening. And there are probably woolly mammoths already that are gene edited, and they're just keeping it secret for now. What are your thoughts on that? Should we bring back the woolly mammoth? Or how about Anomalocaris? Could you imagine if we brought this back to the oceans?
I have never been in favor of meddling with nature in that manner. It seems to always lead to catastrophe. It sounds like a terrible idea to me. Granted that I'm not even interested in genetically modified organisms, right? Like, I think that's a disaster.
Yeah.
I really think we don't have any business playing around with this stuff.
No. So the question is, what happened that we can all of a sudden go from nothing to this crazy world of predators and prey a bottom feeder, all the ecological niches filled, corals, and so on. Now, let's go back to the, of course, I can't find it here. A couple things to consider. During the explosion right here, it's where the purple and the blue line come together. Carbon dioxide was at 3,000 parts per million.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings us to the break. Enjoy your plant food. We'll be right back.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine. Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
Join me on the Brian Rouge Show on Revolution Radio, Eastern Standard Time, every Tuesday night from 6 to 8. We talk about the four most vital things, in my view, affecting all of humanity. Number one is UFOs and aliens and their agenda for the advancement of humanity. Number two is the Jewish establishment's control over all aspects of human civilization. Number three, the truth about Adolf Hitler, how he was the opposite of what we've been told. Number four is advanced ancient global civilizations. Join me on the Brian Rouge Show, Tuesday nights from 6 to 8 on Studio B on Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at higher risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
And we're back once again after the break. That Brian Rouge show, man.
Nobody likes that bumper.
I know we do have some complaints. We do not support we do support Revolution Radio and the right of free speech, but not
Absolutely.
necessarily endorse the commercials.
No.
Now you can watch this replay over at our YouTube channel, Magnetic Reversal News. That didn't work. The cough button, she missed it. Okay, so we've been talking about life and life on Earth, and I just went over the geology and the time frame. Around 700 million years ago, these flat things show up. They're about a meter long. They disappear during some major glacial cycles that grind the Earth into powder and remove 14 miles of the surface, in North America anyway. And then boom, 540 million years ago, every ecological niche is filled. In the ocean, mind you, we got two other mass extinctions that we're not going to talk about. We will maybe in another show. We've got the Ordovician, Silurian, and Devonian mass extinctions, which on the other side of those boundaries is where you get things like plants and then fishes and then jungles. But this one, what happened was the oceans immediately filled all the ecological niches with creatures. What's going on?
It's such a fascinating, well, at least the hypothesis that I'm working with is completely fascinating to me.
Well, the simplest explanation, and I'm sure logically thinking people out there are screaming at the screen, it's the oxygen level. And so Earth had very low oxygen during the Precambrian. It was very low, it was like 1%, I think. Leah's got the data. And it stayed that way for the entire time that the only organisms in the ocean were single-celled algae. So for billions of years, the oxygen was very low. I think the algae was preventing it from growing. It was eating it all up.
Yeah, that could be. That could be.
Then something shifted and the oxygen started to go up slightly. Now, what time period did you find in the most recent research that the oxygen went up precipitously to, like, say, a few percent, 3 to 5?
Well, I don't have super specific dates, but there's a Scientific American article that talks about in about 541 million years ago, we start seeing a rise in oxygen, and that happened sort of in several steps. And then there's another researcher named Eric Sperling who went around the globe, and because this oxygen data is coming via proxies, and the proxies are metals in the sense of what their solubility is. So what the solubility of iron is, for example. So he goes around and he takes iron measurements around the world. He doesn't find a really significant shift, but I guess it's a very gradual shift. And so what he concludes is that initially we have an oxygen level that's like 0.5% of average global sea surface concentrations. So very, very small. And this is when we have like teeny tiny worms, obviously single cell organisms, very simple food webs. Nobody's eating each other. Everybody's just eating microbes. So we're beyond single celled organisms. We've got some very simple, slightly more complex organisms. They're just eating microbes. I guess you could say they're predators in some kind of way, but really we consider that like herbaceous activity.
They're vegan predators.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bastards.
Unless you're a vegan that objects to eating bacteria, and those seem to exist as well. I don't know how you avoid that. But anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. And then we get to the level of the oxygen rises to somewhere between 0.5% and 3%. And we start getting more abundant animals, but it's still a really simple food web. Everybody's still eating microbes.
That would be the Ediacaran fauna.
Yeah, yeah. And then somewhere we get to like 3 to 10% oxygen levels. That's when the predators emerge.
541.
So, somewhere around there. Yeah. Yes. So
hence,
this is still just the background condition, right? These are the conditions that is allowing diversity of life to occur. It doesn't explain the existence of the diversity of life in and of itself.
Like if we sectioned off an acre of the jungle in plexiglass and sealed it hermetically, completely. And then we pumped in oxygen and brought it up to 40%, double what it is now. The fauna, nothing's going to change. So
nothing is going to change unless there's some latent genetic material that's around.
Right. So the problem is you don't just turn the oxygen up and algae then doesn't turn into Anomalocaris.
Right. Right. And this is actually what Pasteur basically proved, right? He did these experiments where he would take, microbes in a flask, sterilize it, like isolate it, and lo and behold, no more microbes emerge. But once you subject them to the outside atmosphere where that material is available, well, then you get more microbes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the question is, where did the first thing come from? Where did the algae come from 4 billion years ago that seeded, notice I use that word, the ocean?
Mm-hmm.
And it brings us back to, well, how does stuff accumulate on Earth? Billions of tons of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's cosmic dust. So we've got all this dust falling in.
Mm-hmm.
And then I even postulated this to you, that during the Cryogenian period, the whole Earth is covered in ice. We know from a paper we studied that ice preserves DNA, bacteria, and all kind of other stuff cryogenically during the Cryogenian. What if during the Cryogenian, those ice sheets were capturing all the cosmic material and preserving it? And this could include thousands of micrometeorites, meteorites, asteroids, comets hitting the Earth. And in those asteroids, comets, and meteorites, they were parts of other planets that had life, that had viruses. We have found viruses up in the troposphere, up in the mesosphere, near space.
In the stratosphere.
There's not because people are coughing into the stratosphere. It's because they're entering from space.
Yes.
So
yes.
we've got the critter we need to create evolution. We've got cosmic events, we've got cosmic dust, we've got material raining in from space, we've got ice to preserve it. And then when the ice melts, the oxygen's a little higher, and this thing mutates, and it can react in a different way and become something else.
Well, not only that, but this paper that I'm assuming we will link in the description box of the video on YouTube.
Let's go to it.
This is an absolutely fascinating paper. And one of the things that's discussed in here is, I guess, particularly during the Cryogenian, supposedly Earth was being completely bombarded with comets, meteorites. I don't know what was going on and why that was the case. I don't know if you do. But so then you have a period of time where you've got a buildup potentially of genetic material coming via organic molecule. Well, an organic molecule obviously doesn't have genetic material, but potentially viruses, other organic materials entering Earth. And then they sit there frozen for a long period of time. And then the ice melts. And guess what happens? We have this explosion of life. So, it would have been more gradual, except for this major period of glaciation. There's a bunch of mechanisms that are discussed in this paper in terms of how this material gets to Earth. And it's interesting because there's a lot of references to icy comets in this paper, which, of course, yeah, we have a problem with, right? Like the dirty snowball idea doesn't stack up. I mean, we've landed on comets, we've looked at them, they're not icy on the surface. However, that does not preclude the idea that comets may contain some water that may help preserve microorganisms.
Yes. I mean, comets, even the driest comet we landed on, it is producing. Not only is it producing water in the ion tail or one of the tails, but when they take 1 to 3% of the comet is water, but it's not like a frozen snowball. It's inside of the comet, like in very small amounts.
Well, this is super fascinating. So, like,
wait, before we go further, we haven't even the title of the paper for the people listening is Cause of the Cambrian Explosion, Terrestrial or Cosmic. There's dozens of authors, so it's not like a fringe idea.
It's about 30 people. Yeah.
It's published in Progress in Biophysics and Molecular Biology.
Yes. Yeah. Apologies to the auditory only viewers. I didn't mean to forget about the fact that you don't have a visual on this. This is it's a review article basically, but 30 people came together with their expertise and put this paper together. And I think it's fairly seamless.
They review in this paper, and the one that I'm leaning towards, I'm sure you are, is the evidence of the Hoyle-Wick-Ramaching, or the HW, which is easier to say, thesis on cometary cosmic biology.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Well, and then the simple way of describing this whole concept is called panspermia. So literally, the Earth is being seeded with material from the whole cosmos.
From
right? Pan is everything.
space.
What?
It's from space.
Right. It's sexy space.
It's fantacular. That's a new word. The focus in all of these authors is that the emergence of complex retroviruses of vertebrate lines occur just before the Cambrian explosion.
Yes.
And so that might be what is needed for all this biodiversity.
Yeah, no, that's a really key piece to all of this. But let me back up a little bit because, okay, just as an example, we were talking about comets and water and all of that, right? Halley's comet apparently showed some evidence of bacteria in it. Then you've also got Comet 67P has jets of organic molecules and oxygen and water vapor, and then about 1% of that is actually consistent with the degradation of bacteria, which is really interesting. Even more interesting, Comet Lovejoy apparently emits ethyl alcohol.
Hello.
Like a huge quantity, apparently the equivalent of 500 bottles of wine a second.
Wow.
Alcohol comes from microbes do the work of fermentation that creates alcohol.
Could get their hands on that comet. It might help
I
your
know.
stop.
Yeah, if you want to be a lush, that's get your hands
Yeah,
on that.
we've known that because like Venus produces hydrocarbons in the atmosphere. Literally, if ExxonMobil could harness Venus, they'd be rich.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Fossil fuels bad.
Right.
And again, fossil fuels, Venus is creating hydrocarbon in the atmosphere. There's no fossils involved.
Yes. Yeah. Well, don't get me started on that road. I was just doing a little bit of reading about that yesterday, but that's a different
So we got a
conversation.
comet. Comet Lovejoy is shooting out ethyl alcohol. Halley's comet has biology on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what was 67P? Because that's the one we did the most study on.
Organic molecules.
That has organic molecules in the tail.
Yeah.
They literally sampled them.
Oh, even more interesting. And this is a quote from this paper.
There it is.
Talks about photosynthetic microorganisms operating at low light levels near the surface at perihelion could produce oxygen along with organic. So the side facing the sun in particular sort of will tend to show microorganisms and especially their degradation on that side, which is pretty interesting.
Interesting. On the comets, you're saying?
Yeah. But okay, so then of course you have to talk about also the preservation of this organic material. Like, how is it surviving space and it's really cold and there's a vacuum and all of that? But the basic idea is that the substrate of a comet or even a meteorite, because by the way, in meteorites, there have been microbial fossils that have been found. Yeah. So that's, the evidence that the microbes are there, it's there. There's no question. And like you said earlier, we've retrieved organic material from the stratosphere, and that's being very careful, like taking into account other places where that may have come from. Like, it's not contamination. It's there in the stratosphere, and it's not like we're spitting it up there into space.
Well, to be fair, in those studies, there are large volcanic eruptions that blow the surface of the Earth up into the stratosphere.
Yeah, sure.
Including the ocean. And we've even talked about some of the deposits in Gobekli Tepe that were salt deposits, or maybe you weren't on that show. Yeah, I was talking about the burning of Sodom and Gomorrah. You missed that.
Oh.
But there are deposits of the ocean, like way on inland, suggesting a comet hit and splashed the ocean up there.
Yeah.
So we can get some stuff from the surface of the Earth up there, but these are things that I don't think are atypical of what's on Earth.
Right. And then, okay, so there's that preservation element, right? And so one of the things the only thing actually I find frustrating about this paper is that there's a consistent reference to icy comets, and that being part of the preservation. Now, again, it doesn't mean that you can't have pockets, let's say in a comet, where you do have some ice, it's cold enough.
Well, and there also have been cases of ice falling from space hitting Earth. There's cryo ice.
Right.
They're not comets, it's just ice from space.
Right.
So you could have something in the center of that ice ball.
Right. Sure. Absolutely. At the same time, the authors acknowledge, where is this? I'm just going to quote this. These data posed a serious challenge to Whipple's dirty snowball comet model that was the reigning paradigm at the time. space probes to Halley's Comet in 1986 established its dust as high in carbonaceous compounds and its surface is very dark, quite unlike ice or snow. Like, we've known this for decades, and yet we're still claiming that comets are dirty snowballs. It's crazy making. But I guess my point is merely
let's get this clear. They're electric asteroids. There's asteroids and there's electric asteroids.
Yes. And
there are no dirty snowballs in space.
Right.
None that we've found yet.
Right. They're made of rock.
So stop with the dirty snowball idea.
Right. And you don't need, one of the things that became clear to me in the process of reading this is that you don't need icy comets to preserve this genetic material. And part of the reason for that is that there's also cases of microbes surviving insane conditions. Like, there was an experiment.
The tardigrade is
right.
complex, and you
Right.
can shoot that into space for 1 million years, I think, and it will revive.
Right. Yes. But that thing can survive without food or water for 30 years. And it can handle the vacuum of space, which brings up another question about, like, why does this organism exist that can survive these conditions when it never would have ever encountered those conditions on Earth? Right? Like, it throws the idea of Darwinian natural selection pretty much out the window. And there's another case of this. There's a fruit fly, the Drosophila fruit fly. That fruit fly's eyes are basically resistant to UV damage at a certain wavelength, but that wavelength never reaches Earth. So why does it have that ability?
Oh, that's interesting. That means that we had a very weak magnetosphere when it was formed.
Well, that, or the genetic material that gave that fruit fly came from somewhere else, not Earth.
Are you saying mosquitoes are aliens?
Fruit flies, yeah.
Oh,
well,
no.
what I'm saying is that we're all aliens, actually.
Yes, we are.
I mean, just another example, there's 2 algae species that survived 16 months on the exterior of the International Space Station. There's another case of a microbe that survived on a rocket that was launched into space.
So we're panspermia space right back.
Yes.
Space made us, and now we're seeding the rest of the universe. Gosh knows what the damage we're doing.
Well, and the most important part of all of this, the thing that really clinches it for me, is that if you analyze the phylogeny and the time sequences of retroviruses, right? Retroviruses being viruses that do incorporate into the genome. Regular viruses don't do that. Retroviruses do. So they have the ability to change the genome. Retroviruses emerged in vertebrate hosts in the ocean somewhere between 550 million years ago and 460 million years ago.
Wow, that's exactly when it happened.
Exactly.
So it's becoming, from this small 50-minute presentation, we can clearly see that terrestrial cannot be the answer, simply because since the 1600s, people have been trying to mix their own primordial soup to create something out of nothing, and it never worked. Never once. Right. You would think in hundreds of years in experiments, someone would pull it off using electric or lightning, but no, they haven't.
Yeah, and in this paper, one of their conclusions basically is that that the biosphere is not just Earth. It is the solar system, the galaxy, the universe. The biosphere is all of that. And you still have a question about, like, okay, well, still, where did the first life come from, or where did the first genetic material come from? To me, that answer is easy, because I don't believe in the Big Bang. I believe that the universe is infinite, both in space and time, and that it's always been here, that God has always been here, and that is the universe. So there doesn't need to be a starting point, in my opinion.
No, and that leaves plenty of time for this genetic material to get here.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely it does.
To get everywhere.
I mean, go ahead.
Based on these assumptions, the universe is teeming with life.
Yes.
Now,
and
You must consider this, though, that this genetic material, our virosphere or our biosphere, which includes this material, is the Milky Way galaxy, probably not beyond that. So this genetic material, these mutations, this biology that can be created, which by the way, has the hallmarks. If you just think of the paleontological past of all the creatures on Earth, like dinosaurs, there were and Anomalocaris, all these strange things. The possibilities are endless. So it doesn't matter what the oxygen or nitrogen ratio is, or what the atmospheric pressure is. There's genetic material to create life in any condition, in my opinion.
Right, exactly. And the only limitation, I think, really is probably the conditions themselves, right? And we see this at the Cambrian explosion, right? We have life that's like very simple and limited, and then the conditions change, the genetic material is there, and boom, everything that can exist in this environment comes to fruition.
And we can then pretty much conclude that all the biology in the Milky Way is, so far, we haven't found any other examples, is oxygen based, because there is a threshold of where oxygen reaches a certain percentage where all of these things can happen, meaning anything, plants, animals, anything can happen. And we haven't seen any other thing. Like say if we're on a planet and there's no oxygen and the nitrogen increases to a certain thing, there's no evidence that that would create life. The only evidence that we're seeing is that you need a certain amount of oxygen to create life.
Yeah, and something else that's really important in all of this that's discussed in this paper is that, and this is where the fascination with the octopus comes in, right? Like cephalopods are like the amount of genetic information in a cephalopod is huge. And octopus in particular, if you look at the phylogeny, it looks like it jumped way forward in the genetic evolution. It's like there's almost like a huge gap of how this creature came to be. And what's pointed out is that it looks at face value very much like the concept of punctuated equilibrium, that we get these big jumps in evolution. But what could explain that is the entrance of new genetic material. So punctuated equilibrium by itself, it's a pattern, and we see it in the genetic record where we get these big gaps, but in and of itself, it's not an explanation of anything.
No, and in general, punctuated equilibria lacks the cosmic mechanism. So what they are assuming that there is a mutation. The mutation creates what's called an exaptation, which is something that the creature has no use for. But if the conditions change, that thing, that the mutation, like a third arm, let's say, or a fifth eye in the back of your head, if the conditions change where that exaptation becomes critically useful, you have a whole new species. And then they learn how to mate with each other, and that mutation lives on. But how do you get the mutation? It's coming from space. And in the case of the cephalopod, it's got to be such a major mutation in the case of octopus that it's unexplainable.
But it's also the issue of,
because you get this new material from nowhere all of a sudden showing up.
Well, but it's also the issue of like the octopus is so distanced genetically from its ancestors that it's like unexplainable. Like how did its genetic information become so wildly different where it appears to have skipped like whole genera, And so that's really the question and why this comes up.
Well, and that's the stupid assumption that comes from uniformitarianism and classical thinking, that there is a specific line and missing links as you go through. That doesn't exist in paleontology. It's made up by the paleontologist who puts things that look similar next to each other, saying it went from here to here to here. It never works that way in the fossil record. You've got a creature, on the other side, you got a new thing, and that one's gone. There is no missing link. There are no simple steps. So you don't have to step like tiny steps. You can go from we've seen it. We just talked about it. You go from these soft-shelled creatures, and then the next day there's 80,000 species in the ocean.
Right, but like what I'm saying from the perspective of the genetic information, right? It's as if you have a strand that says A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then suddenly the strand is A, ST, whatever, like RSTWX. Like it's just complete. It's like so different that these things are clearly related, but the genetic information is so wildly different. It's like, how did we get here?
So it's aliens.
Yeah, basically.
But not in the sense that we think. It's not little green men and spaceships that are made of metal that is produced on Earth.
No, it's saying that all creatures on Earth, including us, are cosmic. We're not just Earth-based. We are actually cosmic. We are aliens ourselves. But it becomes moot at that point. The idea of an alien is moot.
You are a star child. We love you. Let's go.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.